Dr. Reginald Richardson. I've been a person who's been involved in mental health for the last 35 years. I'm the managing partner of Psychotherapy Partners, which is a psychotherapy practice here in Chicago. Prior to that, I worked in the state of Oregon for Governor Brown, directing the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission. Before that, I was a deputy director for the Department of Human Services for the state of Oregon, and I could go back some 30-odd years of my experiences, but I've done a lot of work in mental health, and I've been with Operation Change since its inception. Matter of fact, back to when we were planning, and I advocated that we have a session on mental health, because mental health and physical health are so closely related. And I first did depression, and I handed out a very similar scale that I'm handing out now, and found that at least a third of the women who were participating in the program had actual clinical depression. So it's very common. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we can do about it and how depression impacts your physical health. So the form that I've just handed out to you right now, there's nothing that you need to do with it at this moment. We'll get to it in just a second. I've got only about an hour, so I'll present some material to you, then I'll see if you have any questions about the things that we've talked about. I'm joined here by my better half, Helen Richardson, is over there by the wall. So this is weekend time, not work time, and so I bring my wife to these when I get a chance to hang out with her. So what I'd like to do now, because I'm so crazy about that girl. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. What I'd like you to do is to tell me your name. I know you're in week 3. Did I hear that? You're in week 3 of the program? Okay. So, and any interesting fact about you that you care to share. So we're going to do this real quickly, and we'll start with this lady right here.
You know.
I saw you put something in your mouth. That's
You
what I
know.
thought.
My name is Linda Obana.
Very nice to meet you, Linda. Glad you're here. You want to say anything, one interesting fact about you?
I have MS,
Okay.
and I was diagnosed with depression in 2000. I was fine until my mother passed.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing. Ma'am, go ahead.
My name is Joanne Branch. I have nothing to say.
Okay, that's fine. Ma'am?
My name is Nona Mans.
Okay.
It's very interesting because at this time a lot of my issues are around my son who has MS. And I was talking to my sister here sometime because I would like to know more. But he never took treatment for his.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. In the red.
Portia Ball,
Welcome.
Sheree Lee.
Nice to see you.
Well, Trace Williams, interesting about me, I enjoy plant-based baking.
Oh, okay. Let's come up front, ma'am, please.
And Netta Joseph, I have not suffered, but I pay a family member for mental health or depression.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Patricia Evans. We can, anything interesting about ourselves?
Anything that you care to share
Oh, okay,
in this environment?
okay. On Thursday, my church's anti-racism task force went to Springfield's lobby, and our issues were immigration, environmental justice, and the prison-to-school pipeline.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Ma'am, in the orange.
My name is Lois Fry.
Nice to see you. Ma'am, in the back there.
My name is Gloria Mason. I haven't you should have.
Okay. We'll just come on over. Yes, please.
I'm Karen Silver, and I'm a Facebook entity.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm
What's your name?
Helen Richardson, retired educator for 34 years.
That's why I got to work. Okay, so anyway, let's go ahead and get into it a little bit more. Here's what I want us to do today. Now you have this patient health questionnaire I'd like you to fill out. The questionnaire, I hope you have a writing utensil. You don't have to put your name on it. This is really just for you. And the time frame that we're thinking about as you answer these questions is over the last 2 weeks. How often have you been bothered by any of the following? And there are just 9 statements here. And you will circle if it's not at all, several days, more than half the days, and nearly every day. So the first one is little interest or pleasure in doing things. Is that for you not at all, several days, more than half of the days, or nearly every day? Number 2, feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. Not at all, several days, more than half the days, nearly every day. Number 3, trouble falling asleep, falling or staying asleep, or sleeping too much. Not at all, several days, more than half the days, nearly every day. Number 4, feeling tired or having little energy. Number 5, poor appetite or overeating. Not at all, several days, more than half the days, or nearly every day. Number 6, feeling bad about yourself, or that you're a failure, or having left let me try this again. Or feeling bad about yourself, or that you are a failure, or have left yourself or your family, let yourself or your family down. Easy for me to say. Not at all. Several days, more than half the days, or nearly every day. Number 7, trouble concentrating on things, such as reading the newspaper or watching the television. Number 8, moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed. Or the opposite, being so fidgety or restless that you've been moving around a lot more than usual. Not at all, several days, more than half the days, or nearly every day. And finally, number 9, thoughts that you would be better off dead or hurting yourself in some way. Not at all, several days, more than half the days, nearly every day. So if you put 0 to any of those, if you follow down the column to where it says for office coding total score, you would put any of those zeros there. If it's several days, you add those up. If it's more than half the days, you add those 2's up. Nearly every day you add up any of the 3's that you put down. You add that together and it gives you a total score. Any questions about what I've asked you to do? Yes, ma'am.
When you said you add them up, what you saying? I feel like if I checked out 2 twice, am I supposed to say, I did it twice, or I supposed to put down the number 4?
You would add those 2 times that you put the number 2 down, yes. That's what this is asking down here. You just add
I
these.
put down the number 2 for that.
Yes. Yeah. You just add the columns up. When you got them all done, just look up here and that'll let me know that you are ready for our next. So you add up all the numbers, that'll give you a total score, and then we'll talk about what the total score have a score between 0 and 4, it means that you either have no depression based on the last 2 weeks period, or there's minimal depression over these last 2 weeks. If you score 5 to 9, that's mild depression. If you got a score between 10 and 14, that's moderate depression. 15 to 19 is moderately severe depression. 20 to 27 is severe depression. If anybody scored between 15 or higher than 15, that's depression significant enough that you might consider getting some help with it. If any of you answered the number 9, question number 9, which asked thoughts that you would be better off dead or hurting yourself in some way, if any of you endorsed that or said yes to that, that's also an indication that you might need some help to talk to somebody about that. Okay? The purpose of this is just to get you comfortable with understanding depression for your own self, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means specifically. So let me move on. Any questions about what we just did? It's hard to talk about depression if we don't first understand physical health, which I think you all understand physical health, but also there's mental health. And mental health is involved in the idea of what are our emotions, our feelings, our psychological and social well-being. How do we feel about ourselves? How do we feel in our environments? The affect of depression or mental health is how we think. It involves thinking, feeling, and how we act. When we talk about physical health, if you have hypertension, you may not act differently than you regularly do. But when we talk about mental health, the way we act, the way we feel, how we think often changes. Mental health determines how we handle stress. Everybody has stress. Well, let me ask you, is there anybody in here who has never experienced stress? Because I'd like to interview and find out how that's possible, because I'd like to add that to my life. Stress is the most dangerous experience we can have. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So mental health determines how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and how we make even choices for ourselves. And mental health is something that happens in every stage of life for all of us, regardless of the stage of life that you may find yourself in. Young, old, doesn't matter. Mental health is with us just like physical health. When mental health becomes problematic, all of us right now have mental health. It could be good mental health and well-being, or it could be bad mental health or well-being. 1 in 5 of adults in the United States have some mental health condition. 1 in 5. So if there's 30 of you in here, we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One of those 5 people will have a mental health. It may not be depression, a mental health condition. It may not be depression, it could be something else. And as we just talked about in our scale, depression goes from mild depression to severe depression. Someone who experiences feelings of being blue, maybe, or sad, to someone who can't even get out of the bed. That's the range of it for depression. There are other mental health conditions that impact our thinking, our mood, and our behavior. So why do some people have mental health problems or conditions and other people do not? There are some factors that go into determining how or when we might develop mental health conditions. One is biological factors. Those have to do with our genes or our brain chemistry. It also might have to do with what we inherit from our family. There are also life experiences, stress, trauma, abuse, a list of other life experiences that really impact us, that affects our mental health conditions. And then, as I've said, family history also is an indicator of our mental health conditions. Specifically for African Americans, as you know, we're about 13.4% of the population, and we have about 16% of our community will have a mental health or has a mental health condition last year. That's about a total of 7 million people who suffer with mental health problems. It shouldn't be surprising to you that the rates of mental health for our community are about the same as for white communities. The most common type of mental health problem are anxiety, which is the fear of the unknown. It expresses itself in physiological responses. You might have experienced or know people who've had panic attacks. It's this overwhelming feeling of nervousness. Your mouth may become dry. Your heart may start to race. Your hands become wet and clammy. That's an example of anxiety. It also comes out in other ways, difficulty
Shortness
sleeping.
of breath.
Pardon me?
Shortness of breath.
Shortness of breath, yes. Those are all examples of how anxiety comes out and expresses itself. So this is getting to the meat of our topic for today, and that is depression. Depression is the most common mental health disorder there is, both for adults and even for children. About 5% of adults experience depression. Depression is most commonly characterized by persistent sadness, a lack of interest in the things that you used to be excited about. For some people who have depression, there's this thing called psychomotor retardation, which means you have a difficulty getting out of bed. Movement is difficult. I mean, literally, it feels like there are weights on you and you can't get out of bed. Now, interesting with depression for children and particularly teenagers, their depression is not like this. Their depression is rarely sad. It's more agitated, angry, aggressive. Some of the things that we see from our young teenagers that are doing things out in the streets, that's an expression of depression. They're not just criminals. Some are just criminals. But the vast majority of these kids are experiencing depression that nobody's identified, because people think of depression as this sad, low energy thing. That's not true for kids. There are 7 main types of depression. There's what most people may have even experienced or know about is what's called major depressive disorder. There's another disorder that's called persistent depressive disorder, which is a low-level depression that you have all the time. When you take a history of a person, you'll find that they will explain that they've been depressed since childhood, and it's always present for them. Bipolar disorder is a very interesting disease, which is characterized by people having extreme highs, where people will be up all night cleaning, organizing, doing lots of kinds of energy, and times when they can't even get out of bed, and in between. There's something that happens for women, postpartum depression, after they experience a birth of a child. That's postpartum depression. There's premenstrual disorder. This is characterized by women who might, in advance of their period or during their monthly monthly cycle had experiences of depression and way mood swings.
Yeah.
Very emotional. That's a normal thing anyway during particular times of the month cycle, but this is the extreme. There's seasonal affective disorder. A lot of us have seasonal affective disorder, particularly in areas like Chicago where 9 months out of the year it's cloudy and overcast. And then in every medical disorder, there's always the atypical, which means people don't fit in any of these categories until they fit into a special category called atypical, meaning not typical. I want to share with you a short video. Any questions about what we saw in the video? Or comments? Please.
Depression can be situational.
Yes. The question, just to make sure you heard it, can depression be situational? Yes. I can give you an example of it. A loss of a loved one would be an example of situational depression, in which a person has sadness, loss of interest in doing things, difficulty getting out of bed, those kinds of typical symptoms. But once time has passed, the depression lifts, we would say that would be a situational depression. Great question. Any other questions about what we've seen in types of depression? Without saying if it's you or not, does this make sense? Have you seen this
Yeah.
in yourself or in your family members?
Yeah.
When, one of the questions you haven't asked, but I would want you to make sure you know is, well, when do you go get help? You can be depressed and not get help. And lots of people do it. Lots of black people do it. We are greatly suffering. We would rather suffer than go get our help sometimes. When depression or any other mental health condition gets in the way of our functioning, doing the things we like to do, engaging in relationships with other people, having thoughts that are so dark that we feel like we want to hurt ourselves. Those are all indicators that it's time to get some help. When we can't work, we can't do school, we can't do social things, when it really messes with our ability in our day-to-day lives, that's when it's time to get help. Yes, ma'am.
Out of those depression, what would you consider is the top four that desperate, you need to go get help? You experiencing those top four, or what is the top three?
Okay, so just to make sure you guys all heard the question, what would I consider the top 3 or 4 of the 7 we talked about? And I would say they all are important because the person who was experiencing it, depression is like on a continuum, right? So it's how you experience that depression is what matters. You can have postpartum depression after delivering of a child, and your ability to care for that child becomes diminished, and in some instances, impossible to care for that child. For the person who's having that experience, that's pretty bad. A person who's having major depressive disorder, a lot of times in that situation, as well as bipolar disorder, it requires a person to be hospitalized because they are having thoughts and doing things that are dangerous. I say bipolar is probably the most difficult one because often when a person is experiencing a manic episode, that behavior is so out of the norm to the person. I've worked with families where a woman developed manic depressive disorder, and she was out on the street engaging in activities that were completely different than what she would normally do, if you can imagine what I'm saying. So it can be very dangerous. And again, all of these can be dangerous without treatment if it gets to the extremes. And I've sort of shared with you, anytime that we are starting to think about hurting ourselves, that's when we've got to get help. But I'd say bipolar is probably the most difficult because most people don't recognize they're in that manic phase. Yes, ma'am.
So what else is menopausal depression? Pre, post, dorm? Is that, is the study on that?
Yeah, can you say that again? I heard only part of what you said.
I didn't see anything about menopausal depression. Is there a study on that? Pre, post, dorm?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is around, is there menopausal depression? Menopause, I think, because of it happens with women, it it doesn't get studied very much. Just like heart disease for women don't get studied very much. And so there's not a lot known. Menopause has in itself many manifestations that include depression. It includes lots of other things. Menopause brain, where there's a fogginess that happens in terms of how you think and things like that that sometimes look like it could be depression, lack of concentration. And so it takes a good professional to make the distinction. But there's very little studied about how menopause impacts depression other than we know it does. It's important for you to have relationships with a good physician to help distinguish between exactly what it is that's going on for you. That's a great question. I wish I had more to say about it. I will say, oh, never mind. Go on.
Yeah, what I can understand about this depression is, say someone is being withdrawn, something like, not doing activities or something like that. Okay, what is the aspect? Where would you place the part that you just find out that someone just talk too much, or talking to ourselves, or talking just, where would you put that? Is that person depressed or something that person has a cycle?
Okay, I'm having a hard time hearing you, but what I thought I heard you say is what happens when a person is sort of talking too much, talking to themselves? Yeah. Okay. You know, what we look at is what's normal behavior or typical behavior for most people. And then when it's outside of that typical behavior, the question is, why is that behavior occurring? You know, there are many differences that exist between all of us, right? But generally talking to yourself out loud is not generally something that most people do. So the question would be, what's up with that? Now, for some people who live alone, they talk out loud all the time because we need that kind of stimulation. So I think for your question, for the person you're thinking about what's up with that, I think we'd have to look to what degree is that behavior problematic. It may be irritating, it could be annoying, it could be weird, but is it problematic? And when we say problematic, it has to do with to what degree does the behavior interfere with people's function? That's really what we get to. When things get in the way of people being able to do the normal human activities, that's problematic. Now, there are some people who have mental health disorders where they are responding to stimulus, things that are happening in their head. That isn't outside. It's inside of them. We call that hallucinations. Okay? And that's a higher level of a disorder than what we're talking about today. With major depressive disorder, one of the characteristics is that a person can become psychotic and have hallucinations. And you have hallucinations in 5 areas. All of your 5 senses, you can have hallucinations. Okay. Now we're getting into a whole another thing, and I must get out of that because I can get this professor mode and talk to you about this all day long. So let me stop that. Thank you for those questions. Let me move on. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a reason why a lot of young men have depression and bipolar and schizophrenic behaviors?
I wouldn't agree that it's a lot of men.
Well, in my family, it's quite a few.
And you're asking why is it more likely that a male would have that disorder?
Yeah.
Okay, I understand the question better. Thank you. You are right. For schizophrenia, men are diagnosed more than women, and more black men than white men.
Yeah.
But if you look at the reasons why that happens, and there have been some studies on that, they're not actually schizophrenic. They have other behavioral problems that the people who make the diagnosis fundamentally have problems with black people.
Mm-hmm.
And no difference than when you see when we are part of a society and a medical system that sees us differently and not positively, right? Not in a positive light. They see us as being able to sustain more pain, so we don't get pain medication to the same level that other groups do. So part of it is this misunderstanding of what's fundamentally happening with our people. The other is that men generally express things in a much more aggressive way than women do.
Yeah.
And so schizophrenia is a disorder that is characterized by disorganization, bizarre behavior. You know, you've seen people walking around the street talking to themselves, doing weird and strange things. That's a good way to think about schizophrenia. That's how schizophrenia is often. It gets in the way of them doing their basic functioning. But it's more about family history and genetics and stress that happens throughout that person's life that will manifest itself in a disorder. Schizophrenia, for example, will generally make itself known by around the age of 20 or so. Sometimes a little later, but that's where you start to see the first beginning of those symptoms. So I would say it's misdiagnosis, one. Two, it happens more often with men for unknown reasons. And men tend to express themselves in more aggressive ways than women do.
And about bipolar disorder?
And bipolar disorder, actually more females have bipolar disorder than men. And I can't recall right now off the top of my head some reasons, but I would imagine the reasons are the same, is how that disorder manifests itself. More likely, women get more depressed or express depression more than men do. Yeah, that's all I'll say. I don't have a good sense of that off the top of my head at the moment.
My one nephew jumped off a building and they diagnosed him with severe depression, bipolar, and schizophrenia.
Yeah, that's an interesting diagnosis because some of those diagnoses outrule the others, but I won't get into that. Again, we don't have tests that we can, like a blood test that would say a person has these disorders. It's listening to the history, understanding the condition, and then you come up with a diagnosis. And I think oftentimes we make errors in that.
Usually there's an underlying reason why.
Yeah, and stress would be always an underlying reason, as well as just a biological predisposition because of our genetic composition
Yeah.
that happens. Yes, ma'am.
What effect does drugs have to do with, some individuals, particularly schizophrenia?
For more dangerous drugs like hallucinogenic drugs, LSD, drugs like heroin, there is a correlation between, for some people who use those drugs, particularly LSD, mushrooms, and others, a correlation with schizophrenia because of the bizarreness of the behavior. But the question would be, I don't think it's you use these drugs and you become schizophrenic. For some people that has happened. More likely, the person is developing schizophrenia, and to sort of treat themselves, they're using the drugs to treat themselves. So I think that comes first. Schizophrenia comes first. It gets undiagnosed. They use the drugs, and the drugs sort of make it over. Marijuana, which is now legal here in Illinois, without any studies of the full effect of marijuana, we legalized marijuana. out there today is not the marijuana that was many years ago, in the 60s or the 70s.
Yeah.
It is 7 times more potent than it was back then. And marijuana is more dangerous than it has ever been. And we have very little research that tells us exactly how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, the most dangerous drug, what do you think the most dangerous drug is? Nope. Alcohol.
Yeah.
Alcohol is the most dangerous drug. More people die from alcohol poisoning than any
Yeah.
other type of
A
overdose.
lot of students.
So let me move on. Great questions, and there'll be a little bit more time for some more questions. Let me finish this piece. When we are depressed, in the 7 types of depression that we talked about, that depression has impact on our physical health. It impacts our central nervous system, it includes our brains and our spinal cord.
Contact there, huh?
Our digestive system, our cardiovascular system, and our immune system. When we experience irritability, anger, loss of interest, headaches, trouble sleeping are all responsible or associated with our central nervous system. With our digestive system, depression affects our digestive system by stomach aches, so does anxiety. One of the symptoms of anxiety is also stomach problems, cramps, constipation, and malnutrition. In our cardiovascular system and our immune system are impacted by depression. It affects our stress hormones. Oftentimes it will either speed or slow down our heart rate. It makes our blood vessels tighten. It convinces our body that we are in a fight or flight state. It can lead to heart disease. It has negative impacts on our immune system, our ability to fight diseases. And it makes us generally just more vulnerable to infections and other types of diseases. So depression is real, and it's a problem. It's a problem because of how it makes us feel, function, but it also is a problem because it affects our entire body. I wish that we didn't have this sort of physical health system and a mental health system, because in reality, for the human being, it's one system. And that concludes my slides. And so what I'd like to do now is just to have a conversation about any questions or comments that you guys want to have in the remaining few minutes we have. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you mentioned family history and genetics a couple of times. So my question is, 'cause I had a mother who had
You have a mother what?
my mother had she was to the point where she had to be hospitalized sometimes. I have 8 brothers and sisters, and we all seem to have some level of challenges in that area. So how likely is it for it to continue like generations? I mean, if it seems like from what you said that it's predetermined because of family history.
Yeah, it's not as predetermined. Well, first of all, it depends on the type of mental illness. Some mental illnesses are more genetically based than others. Okay? So it doesn't, so you know that if you have brown eyes, you know that somebody in your lineage had brown eyes. And that's going to continue to come down the family tree. Mental illness doesn't work exactly like that, right? So you can have a predisposition towards mental illness because you had a family member, a parent, who had mental illness. But if your life is not stress-filled, and and you are practicing lots of wellness types of activities, that thing may never express itself. Many of you have various kinds of genes that make you more susceptible to different types of disorders. But if you never are in environments or situations that make that gene express itself, then it doesn't happen. So to answer your question more specifically, you have seen that it is likely, it's 100% likely in that first generation. It becomes less likely in each successive generation, particularly if it's a generation down the line where less and less stress occurs. It does not mean 100% because mom and dad had it or mom had it, that is going to continue in your family life.
So, securely like diabetes or something like that, that can be, if you have a healthy lifestyle, you probably won't get it. So same thing with the wellness, is that what you're saying? That's what I'm hearing.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. And I see now. The other thing is, remember, you can't do anything about genetics. That's real, and that's going to express itself. What you can do about it is, how do I eat? How do I sleep? How do I treat myself? How do I reduce stress? How do I live a healthy and lifestyle that's good for me? When you do those things that you can control, the other thing is there has been this study that prayer, religiosity, that means how religious a person is a protective factor for mental health. So, I can't help but remember we're in a sanctuary, and God can do all things. So, let's remember those things too. Yes, sister, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is like, my sister, she suffered mental illness, but there's no like a trait of mental illness in my generation, like my grandma, my mom, my father, my grandfather, they didn't suffer from mental illness, but all of a sudden my sister developed mental illness, and we didn't know how to like deal with it, to cope with it at that moment. But right now, today, my sister had passed. She had passed July 4th last year, on 4th of July. And with her mental illness, it caused her it kicked in when she was in the car. And it caused her to catch a car accident. And so I was trying to see, like, with mental illness, you think that it'll carry on to her children, or what will happen? Because there wasn't a trait of it in the family, but it kicked in on her on 4th of July.
Sure. So remember I said that you can have family influence or genetic influences, and if there isn't the stress factor, that gene never expresses itself. So whether or not there was a mental illness gene that didn't express itself with your parents, who knows? Now, genetics is only one factor. We also talked about factors such as stress. We talked about factors such as family history, and what we didn't talk about that I neglected to put down, and I'm thinking about now, is environmental factors.
Yeah.
What kind of environment are you in? What kind of traumas may have existed? So your sister could have had multiple reasons that we don't even know about to express the mental illness that she expressed. So it's not just one-to-one. There's no genetic that we know of, and therefore it's curious as to why she developed it. People develop mental illness for lots of different reasons, and they typically are biological reasons. That's what we talk about, genetics. Life experiences, things that happen to you, stressors, environment, things like that. And the other piece about environment that we don't understand very well is the chemicals, the quality of the water we have, the cell systems that exist that are sending microwaves and other type of things throughout the air. We don't know how that affects the human body. So there are all of these things that are also factors of why people experience mental illness. The other thing is what's called temperament. How a person, you have one baby who is perfectly calm and chilled, say is a great baby, and then you have another baby who's completely fussy. Or you have a person who has a bad thing happen to them, and they lose it. They just lose their money. Another person has a bad thing happen to them, and they seem to be okay. So it's these protective factors that exist and risk factors, and how those things express themselves explain why some people get sick